Why, good morning, friends. It is Glenn with the Cactus Atlas, and today I'm at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, and I'm going to tell you about some of the history here of the Grand Canyon Village and some of my favorite stories. I would say any episode about the Grand Canyon, whether it's about the Grand Canyon itself or the fantastic buildings and history here, should really start off here at the canyon itself, because this is really the feature that made everything happen here. So it's after 6 a.m. hour, and the sun's well up now. And as holds true at national parks, nobody is out here. I'm alone enjoying this myself, so more for me. We've made several episodes here at the Grand Canyon, North Rim, South Rim. I think always featuring the Grand Canyon itself. I don't know if we've done any historic bits on this place, so it's been a long time coming, and I did a lot of reading, so I got acquainted with the people and the stories of this place, and I'm even more fascinated and excited to share it with you guys. So let's get into it. I think our story really begins today at a very specific cabin down the way this way. So our story of history today begins with the oldest remaining structure here in the Grand Canyon Village area that predates when the money started rolling in, that predates even the Kolb studio. The Bucky O'Neill cabin, right here, a real piece of Arizona pioneer history. Basically, this was the cabin of a gentleman by the name of Bucky O'Neill, a businessman that was up here before the railroad was here and helped build what was known as the Bright Angel Lodge, the original one, which is now replaced with Mary Coulter's version of that. But that gentleman lived here. Early American pioneers like Bucky, I think, were smart enough to know the tourist draw that this place would have. If only they could figure out a convenient way to get people out here comfortably. That was all that was missing in the late 1800s out here. Bucky spent time back then trying to convince railroads to build a line up here, to get that tourist trade up here, and indeed that is what ends up happening. But unfortunately, Mr. Bucky's life ended just shortly before he was able to see all of that come to be. Oh nice, here's a sign that shows what this area would have looked like back in the day, and there's your cabin. Note the 2 doors, windows. Same facade today. All of the buildings this way no longer exist. However, the reason this still exists today is because a person named Mary Jane Coulter, who was commissioned to build what lodge is there today, the Bright Angel Lodge, decided she wanted to preserve the history in this cabin. Thankfully she did. I'd say Bucky had the right idea, for sure, and was on the right track, but unfortunately his life was cut short in 1898, not even in this country. So you all have heard of Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War, where, well, he was convinced and he went there to fight, and he actually died at the Battle of San Juan Hill in 1898. Heard he got shot in the neck by a sniper on there, and I don't think many did perish, but unfortunately Mr. Bucky O'Neill did, and he never was able to see his vision come to fruition, which is kind of sad. But I think you have to give the guy credit really for maybe starting interest in helping with that early tourist industry here at the Grand Canyon. And I think this cabin serves as a fantastic launching off point for the rest of our story when Mr. O'Neill's vision starts to become true and the railroad makes its way up here in 1901. So I thought it only fitting to come here after seeing the Bucky O'Neill cabin, because this was Bucky's dream. This is what he was working towards before he was killed and shot in the neck. This is it. The railway that came to the Grand Canyon. So in 1901, they completed the track right up here to the vicinity of Bucky O'Neill's cabin, in fact. But we need to rewind now to 1901, when all of this occurred. During Bucky's time, you had the original Bright Angel Hotel right near the Bright Angel Trail. People like the Kolb Brothers had not yet arrived, although they were dabbling around in this area. We're getting close to that. And in 1901, this building, the train depot, was not actually here yet. We'll talk about that in a second. So one thing to note, I'm not going in chronological order for each of the buildings here, but basically a sign of the times, this railroad depot. But it's really important to understand that prior to that, for maybe about a quarter of a century, for people venturing out this way, the only way to get up here was by taking a horse and carriage from Williams, a very long and uncomfortable journey for sure to get up here. So having the train installed here really opens up a new era of tourism here at the Grand Canyon and ushers in a higher class, I guess you could say, of people. So we live in the time of the automobile, and once the time of the automobile started, that's how most folks would get up here to the canyon. I've seen some wacky photos. You would literally just drive here and you could drive straight up and pull up to the canyon. I've seen this picture of this woman in this old car that she just parked on one of those rocks out on the canyon. Amazing, but don't you think for a second that the train didn't have relevance, or that it does not still have relevance today, because clearly, to me, it looks like this is an operational train depot, and if you guess that it is, it actually is. Now the train depot itself, I mean, this today still services railway passengers. There are passenger services. I see one right there, a baggage room. So if you, I guess, need to leave bags or something here while you explore the canyon, maybe you can, it's either that or they'll have a porter or somebody probably take your baggage uphill to the El Tovar, where if you're staying here, you might be staying at that place or the Bright Angel Lodge down this way. But it's so cool to know that it's still being used today. Still has function today, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places. 1987 is when it got put on there. So the date, I'm sorry if I didn't say it, 1910 is when this was built. So the railway had been coming up here for 9 years. I don't rightly know if something was here prior to them building this or what they did. El Tovar was here, I think 1904. Railway was here maybe 3 years before that. So you could see, we're gonna talk about it when we get up there a little bit later. It wasn't like in 1901, everything just boom, showed up here, but the money started rolling in, the investment starts rolling in, and you get things like the El Tovar to service an upper crusty crowd. So I looked up the guy's name, Francis W. Wilson of Santa Barbara, California, constructed this between the years of 1909 and 1910, when it would have then opened for business to service many customers over the years. And shortly after it opened, this two-story structure made of logs, the bottom level originally was where all the services were housed, and then the upper level back in the day, early on anyway, is where attendants or an attendant and his family might live here at the train station. So I guess there was part residence and part guest services, and I don't rightly know what's going on upstairs there today, other than there's a broken window, it looks like. I wish I had all the time in the world to wait for a train to roll in. The Grand Canyon Railroad. I don't know if they probably have the whistle go, and that's just, I wonder if the first time that noise was heard here, sometime around 1901, the train whistle. Had to have been a first, and I wish I could have been here to witness that and just go back as a time capsule and see that. Those small moments that don't necessarily make all of the history books, but nonetheless paint a fascinating story. So right behind the historic depot is one of the grandest hotels at the Grand Canyon, the El Tovar. I imagine travelers for many decades did the same walk or something similar downhill as they got off the train and had to make their way up here, up to the top of the hill. And now we're kind of getting into evidence of the money and investment starting to roll in when companies like the Fred Harvey Company would come here and help construct and run facilities here like the Tovar Hotel. Kind of the corporate side of things here, if you want to think of it that way. Now, Fred Harvey, the Fred Harvey Company is something a lot of you may have heard of. You've heard of the Harvey girls, Harvey restaurants. Basically, Fred Harvey is credited with really starting the first restaurant chain in the United States in the 1800s. Restaurants that were spread around train stations. And he had high standards. And prior to him building a bunch of stuff around our country, travelers would normally, the best you would get if you had to stop was maybe rancid meat, cold beans, I read, stuff like that. Not very appetizing. If we had to go back there and eat rancid meat, imagine today, with our sensibilities today. But Harvey helped to change that. I think I never really knew much about him, but the more I read, I don't know, I think he deserves a lot of credit for the development of the US, especially the tourist industry in the Southwest. So in 1904, this thing opens, and the Tovar is the first luxury hotel meant to service the more affluent in society, we'll put it that way, in 1904 and beyond. They ended up building a cheaper option for folks that we'll take a look at as part of the tour, or maybe part of a different episode actually. It's Mary Coulter's stuff. Speaking of Mary, there's one of Mary's buildings right there, the Hopi House. I think the very first one she built here, also in the early 1900s. 1905 is what I want to say. And that was commissioned by the Fred Harvey Company, and she happened to be the chief architect and interior designer of that company, I think through 1948. Now, it wasn't that there weren't already people here conducting their business and trade. For example, down this way, we're gonna look at one of the prime ones today, the Verkamps Curios store. Over there is one such example of someone that didn't work with the Fred Harvey Company, that was not part of a corporate venture, that was just a family making a living up here. And there's another two brothers that I would put on that same thing that were often at odds with these folks running this show, because these folks wanted a nice, what they, I guess, clean, upper crusty experience, and they didn't look favorably upon some of these locals that had already instilled themselves in their businesses up here. And there were some shenanigans over the years around that, but everybody got their piece in the end, I think. So I have yet to stay in this hotel. I've been in here many times in the lobby, and we'll look at it. It's beautiful. You do feel like you go back in time, but I think about it and I wonder if I could be back here in those early days. I don't know what I would be doing for a living back then, but would I be in a place in society where I could afford or be welcome at a place like this? Because my impression, I haven't really read any accounts, but I'll tell you what I kind of envision going on here, and tell me if you guys think I'm right or wrong. I was gonna say, have you ever seen the movie Titanic? Of course you have. Who hasn't anymore? But you know how that movie is very much about the classes of the time, and I think that's a little bit after this, not far. But that's kind of what I see, a very class-driven society, where there would have been a lot of snobbery here, and if you came in here not dressed well or whatever, you would have been looked down upon, probably have been told to skedaddle. That's kind of what I envisioned this place was like early on. Today, I think it's much more accessible and can service just about anybody. But back then, it's probably what it was like. Let's go on to this porch and we'll kind of surmise the scene that we may have expected here back in the day as we admire the structure. Very similar. The logs are cut the same way as the train depot. Same style. So today it's free. You can just come out here, and even if you're not staying here, I don't think there's any rules, and just hang out here and sit. And there's always, when I've been here, it's been pretty quiet. I know that can change, but I imagine if we went back to 1904, 1905, and we were hanging out here, seeing the clientele hanging out here, let's picture a bunch of gentlemen of the time, maybe dressed somewhat formally, out here smoking cigars, they're mustachioed, wearing hats, and talking about business. Probably probably similar to conversations folks might have today, just in the context of their time. And they would sit here and enjoy the views and probably drink brandy, who knows. And I'm standing looking at the front entryway and those stairs in the front entrance and thinking about how many feet throughout all of the ages pass through here. And if we could have like a camera set up right where I'm at and have it play on like high speed, and we could see all of the years of fashion and people walking through here, what it would have been like. And the sign today, the El Tovar Hotel. And basically the canyon rim is right there. If you see that wall to protect guests from, I guess, falling over, we're right there. You're that close to the Grand Canyon views. This little village is literally on the rim. Feels like you step back in the time in here. And there is a smell too. A smell of age. And it's hard to describe why. But it just has that older building kind of smell subtly in the background. And it adds to the ambience in this lodge or this hotel. So as we look around and look at all the taxidermy, I see some animals that you can find out in these parts, but this is what I'm calling in the question. Did they ever have moose up here? Because if they did, I didn't know that. I don't know, it doesn't take away from anything, but I'm just curious how many of these are indigenous to this area and how many of them are not. How about bison, which we know we have bison up at the North Rim today. I think those are elk. I don't know if they're mule deer or what kind of deer those are, but here's another moose. And I wonder if they just thought, hey, it would look good here, or if moose did once roam up here at the canyon at some point. The El Tovar Hotel, a still standing, still operational relic of a different age. 1905, not 1904. And like I said, with this hotel and, commissioning people like Mary Jane Coulter to build a little gift shop next door, the Hopi House, to compete with other locals, and probably, to be honest with you, to put people like the Verkamps up here out of business, I would think, would have been what they were up to get rid of their unsightly buildings. They didn't like the way they looked. They didn't think they had any taste, blah, blah, blah. But I think that might be the next place we should go check out, is the Verkamp store. And I'll tell you the story about that. And then you'll see the other side of the Grand Canyon Village that isn't the corporate side with money and railroads behind it. And it's really amongst those folks that I find the biggest heroes and the best stories of the Grand Canyon. Although to sit here and ponder what it would have been like to see this back in 1905 would have been something, but I like the small guy. And yes, I am very familiar with what this is and the significance and the other ones around here. For whoever didn't hear me say earlier, that Mary Jane Coulter is going to get her own episode, because she did so much here that it would be hard to try to mix it in. It wouldn't be right. So yes, I know who she is. Whatever smartass is gonna say something. But as we walk down to the Verkamp store, we have to take in more of those views and just show you the proximity of all this stuff to the actual rim here. That was a loud bird. Basically, if I'm standing here enjoying this view and I turn around, El Tovar is right there. And now right down the hill back there is the train depot, and where people still today get off that train from Williams to come explore the canyon. It's just a stone throws away, but don't throw rocks. There might be someone down there. So it was an interesting time. I think it would have been an interesting time. So I think people were smart enough to know there was opportunity here, but they also knew prior to the railroad that it was just too difficult. And the Verkamps are kind of a story, I think, where you'll hear a little bit of that, and I like this one. But the people over at the Tovar, the Frank Harvey company, did not like these people, is my understanding. In fact, it's also my understanding that they built things like the Hopi House specifically to pull business away from places like this, the Verkamps. But the Verkamps did still tend to a certain demographic that couldn't really afford all of the fine things being peddled at places like this back in the day. So they were relevant. If we make that comparison to the movie Titanic, this would be first class, and I don't know what class this would be. Second class, third class. It's one way to think about it, probably. That's how they would have thought about it. I'm sure there are people over there with their brandy saying, oh, the undesirables over here, the deplorable people that the clientele this Verkamp store attracts, blah, 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 blah. And we'll come over here one more time, and you can't squander your views of the canyon. And as the sun comes up every few minutes, it gets different. And we're actually looking down towards Indian Garden, where we've talked about that before. I've hiked to that. I've actually hiked to the very bottom and back, not only on the Bright Angel Trail, but I took the other trails at the Kaibab Trail down to Phantom Ranch. I've done that. So I've been down, I'm a veteran, I've done it twice, but that was back in my 20s when I was more youthful and able to do stuff like that. So before we can actually start with this building, there's history that predates this with the Verkamps. And in fact, how perfectly timed, and we're gonna see a replica of this also inside of the building. But I believe that is Mr. Verkamp here on the South Rim with a tent selling Indian curios, items that were obtained by local tribes. And this is back in 1898. Now this is not an 1898 structure. This is more around the same time that everybody else is flooding in here. The early 1900s is when they built that. But you can see the building today. Here's an old picture of it. I don't know what year that was. Looks like he opened it in 1906, and he made a profit of $4.98. And they said it was a good day. But you could see outside of the writing on there, not much has changed. Even the font that says Verkamps on it. It's now a visitor center. It's no longer privately owned. And I don't know if there's anybody left from that family today. I know where a lot of them are buried. We're gonna go say hello before we're all done. But basically that building is very much in the same looking state that it was in. So yeah, 1898. Now we're thinking of the time where Bucky O'Neill was trying to get a railroad built up here, right? So Mr. Verkamp was close to a family called the Babbitts. And I believe it's because several of his sisters were married to some of the brothers, so probably some family ties there. But basically the Babbitts had a store, gosh, now I'm forgetting if it was Flagstaff or Williams or both or whatever. But back then, when a lot of people were establishing stores out here, a lot of the clientele didn't have actual cash or money. A lot of them were natives in the area. So a lot of what happened was trade. They would trade trinkets and things like that for goods. But then what did the Babbitts do with that? Well, that's where Mr. Verkamp comes into play. It almost sounds like Mr. Verkamp got stuck with the crappy job. But anyway, what they did is they gave him all of those curios, and they paid him to come up here and set up a tent and to try to sell those curios back to make a profit to the clientele of the early tourism trade here at the Grand Canyon, which wouldn't have been that burgeoning in 1898 just because it was such an inaccessible place. And in this building, we'll get to see a replica of the tent that Mr. Verkamp was selling those wares from. But needless to say, it wasn't profitable. It didn't work out. He ends up leaving until he hears that around 1905, hey, now they got the railroad, things are starting to boom. Maybe it's time to get back up there, because these people weren't dumb. They just didn't have the business yet, but they knew. How could you not know what this was gonna bring? It's almost like a sure shot. I would have looked at it that way. Maybe let's start on the outside and let's talk about that, because you saw the El Tovar, you saw the railroad depot, you're going to see other structures, and you'll see Mary Coulter's work where she tries to make things blend in using natural materials to build. And then you got this old thing. It doesn't really resemble, I don't even know what style that is. I like it, but yeah, it's not, I would say it's not as elegant maybe as something like the El Tovar. Aesthetically, maybe it's not as aesthetically pleasing. Maybe to some it is, but it's a very interesting style. I'm not an architect or anything like that. I don't know much about, or I'm not really into the history of architecture as much as I'm trying to portray it here. So there's probably a term for this style, and I just don't know it. I've read anyway that those people were not a fan of this, and they saw it as an eyesore. And like I said, this catered to, I guess, clientele that didn't have the affluence and money, and they could come here and buy cheaper things like postcards and more reasonable, I guess, gifts. I'm sure some of those Indian curios being sold at the Hopi store, even today it's expensive. We'll go take a look in there eventually, but you want a Navajo rug or something, get your cash out. Those things are not cheap in my experience, but I think they're worth it. They're usually handmade goods. So, but anyway, this was like think of it that way maybe. Now, another interesting thing is this building, I think this might be a good example of one, but certainly the Kolb Brothers studio, which we're gonna go see here in a little bit. Make no mistake, not only did the Fred Harvey Company not like it, but the National Park Service didn't like it either. They wanted to tear this stuff down, and they had people going on record saying that. The National Park Service would have happily demolished this, but something saved these buildings called the National Register of Historic Places, which at the time, I don't know if the rules are still the same, but if a building was over 50 years old, they couldn't tear it down. So, you suck. The people back then, I don't think the current National Park Service represents that view, but now it's a piece of history and it survived. It beat the corporations. All right, folks. In case you notice a slight wardrobe change, I took off my sweater, and the fact that it's now afternoon, not morning, yet we're injecting this into the morning sequence, had some technical issues I discovered with filming a small section of the Verkamp store going inside and a couple other facts I learned, so I need to re-record it and share that with you guys. Some of this was based on a conversation I had with a gentleman that's still working in there now, and he told me some cool stuff about that. But basically, the things that I didn't know, or that I forgot to mention. One, this roof was specially designed to collect rainwater, and that rainwater will drain down into a cistern that's underneath the structure, and over there on the porch is a old pump, a water pump, where patrons could get free water, basically. And it was all rainwater. Now, it doesn't work anymore. The cistern is now empty because now they have natural spring water that they serve here for guests for free. But really interesting thing that the Verkamps provided that. And interestingly, those over at the El Tovar, they were shipping in, I don't know how much volume of water on the railways for their guests, but they didn't like to share. I guess they shouldn't if they're paying for it. But basically they had water over there that was brought in by railway, probably in barrels. So this guy did the right thing and the nice thing for his guests and created a very sustainable solution for water. But yeah, here's that hand pump. I saw a chain on it and I figured, oh, it probably still works, but no, the cistern is empty is my understanding. But yeah, right here is where guests would come and get their free water, their free rainwater. Do one more pass in here. So here's some interesting stuff to look at. One thing that I really enjoyed looking at was the rendition of the tent that was used by Mr. Verkamp to sell the wares for the Babbitt brothers in here, the Indian Curios, the unprofitable first venture that he had. But if you read all this stuff I kind of read through, you see a lot about timelines in here, even more modern timelines than we were talking about, and really cool things like this painting that by a Louis Aiken that I assume is of the period and is still here. I was told it was one of the conditions the Verkamps had for the National Park Service was that they couldn't remove that. But it really is such a cool sight to see, like, you know, there's modern goods in here that probably don't exactly resemble the kind of stuff they were peddling back in the day, but still the same idea. As all the places, really, most of the places we visited today, same thing, they're still serving that function. But this building's over 100 years old. All right, let's continue to the heroes of our story, the Kolb Brothers, as we walk by this place. And you look how tight it is here. I don't know if that's indicative of what I was reading about, how they tried to create a choke point basically here and lead people into here. Even the wall kind of leads you into it, if you kind of think of it that way. And if you didn't even know any better, when I was uneducated, sometimes this is the end of the line when I've taken guests here. I'm like, oh, you want to keep walking? No, this is cool enough. Well, no, there is one more thing that you should go and see, but this lookout studio will be featured on a different episode dedicated to Mary Jane Coulter and her architecture here at the Grand Canyon. But so I'm not hating on Mary when I say these things. She probably had very little to do with it. She probably just wanted to build architecture. But make no mistake, yeah, there was a strategy to how this was done by the snooty and elite. Because if you keep walking, I would say some of the coolest history of the Grand Canyon is not that far away, and you see this little unassuming sign here, the Kolb Brothers Studio and Art Gallery, which I'm really excited to go see. But basically, you wouldn't even know it's down here unless you either keep walking, which I think many would, because look at the views. I mean, you have all the incentive in the world to keep walking here at the Grand Canyon, because the views, you do get different angles and views very easily if you walk. And now coming into view is an older building that's going to look different in style than many others, and it looks like it's open. And we are going to go inside and check out the museum and everything. But this would be the Kolb Brothers Studio, one of the original structures here on the South Rim. This would probably predate by a year or so the El Tovar, for example, and maybe the Hopi House. Not the full complete structure. You're actually seeing additions that were put on by one of the Kolb brothers and his family throughout the years. But it did start off with a simple facade, and I always have trouble trying to identify said facade, but there's a couple things of particular interest that I should mention to you. So we're right outside here at the Kolb Studio, and I want to show you really right off the bat, I think what makes these guys so spectacular is the craziness they did, and probably the biggest thing they did was navigating the river. But these guys knew the canyon, these guys knew what was up, and these guys were the little guy that came out here to find success and work hard and make it, and they did. I would say one of the brothers certainly did, the other one kind of dropped out at some point, but Emery and Ellsworth Kolb. So the Kolb brothers, it's really the story of two brothers, Ellsworth, the older brother, and Emery, the younger brother. And Ellsworth is the one that really made his way out here first. And he had done various jobs, and then he was in the employ of the Bright Angel Lodge, where Bucky O'Neill was right up the way, chopping wood, and then he did a good job, was promoted to porter. And once he started earning a little bit of money, he funded his younger brother, Emery, to come out here, because they probably realized, holy crap, there's something we could do with this. We don't know exactly what yet, but must be something. So now we're here in the early 1900s, prior to 1905, when this was actually, the first section of this was built. The Kolb brothers were operating out here, guess what? Like in a tent, very much like Mr. Verkamp, doing their photographic trade, having a really hard time producing photographs under those circumstances, and we'll talk a little bit about what life was like for them early on where they did their processing of the photos, but they were basically out here in this vicinity in a tent, and they got permission to be here by a Ralph Cameron, a prospector that was mining in this area. There's a couple prospector holes somewhere down here where they actually developed their film for a short time anyway. And that's where it really all started, because I'm going to tell you right now, I read the Santa Fe Railroad would not give the Kolb Brothers permission to set up out here. They tried to go that route and were unsuccessful, so then they were able to talk to a prospector and set up here. But not for free, they had to do a job in return. Now they eventually got permission to build a structure here, and this whole thing is not the original state of what it looked like. Originally it was one section. I have a hard time picking out which piece of building it was. I'm gonna ask when I go inside. It was either this chunk here, there's some early photos Amy could show you, or I'm wondering if it was that little spot down here. One of those two, and then over the years it got added on to piece by piece as they built like a little movie studio where tourists would come in here and watch movies, look at pictures, things like that. And the Kolb Brothers would take photos of people on mule trains heading down this very trail that they could then develop very quickly and sell to their clientele. Usually same day, I was reading. So right over here where you see folks even today heading down is the start of the Bright Angel Trail, and part of the arrangement the Kolb Brothers had with the prospector here that owned the rights to head down this trail that was basically built off of the same trail that Native Americans used in the past. Well, right here there would have been a gate and you would have paid $1. I've read per person, but I've also read $1 per head of cattle, meaning probably like mules would be included in that, meaning that if there was two people on a mule, they probably got charged $1. And it was the Kolb Brothers' responsibility to collect said money, and that was part of the arrangement they had with the prospector that allowed them to build here on his claim. Now here's an interesting fun fact. Let's assume that it was $1 per head of cattle. So if you got two people on a mule, $1 is what I bet it was. And in 1904 money, you can fact check me if I messed it up. I'm cool with that. Comment down below if I did. I did a conversion for inflation of $1 in our 2024 money to 1904, and it comes out to about $35 in some change is what it would have cost you back in 1904 to, basically pay your entrance fee. I imagine, now check out this fun fact. What is the cost to get in here today per private vehicle? $35. Same price. I wonder if that's coincidence or not. Probably so, but that'd be kind of interesting if they chose that price because someone did that conversion and said, well, we're just going to keep the prices the same. What I think is amazing, even though this isn't the world's longest mule train, is we're seeing the same mode of transportation that the Kolb Brothers were taking photographs of people in a very similar fashion to what I'm doing right now. So it would be wrong if we didn't walk down a few steps down the Bright Angel here to kind of get a look at the studio from down below where they were taking pictures of folks doing exactly what you see today over 100 years ago. So we'll maybe fast forward to the 1905 or so where they were set up here. I imagine they had to have been on one of these facades. Maybe that balcony right up there is my best guess. Based on some of the photos you'll see, with the many photos you'll see that they were taking of folks on the mule trains back then. Seems like it was taken from up here, pointing down where you see people walking there. So the importance of all this is you've got about a century of photographic evidence of tourists here at the Grand Canyon specifically, but different ages, different looks, how people dressed, how there's just you can see it in people's faces. It's just it's a documentation of history. So imagine you were one of those early visitors and we paid our $1 here, maybe collected by one of the Kolb Brothers themselves. I don't know, maybe Emery's wife. I don't know who ran that part of the operation, but we would start to make our way down. And I'm gonna guess back then, most people probably exclusively traveled by mule. I don't think your average tourist would have hiked back then like you have people today on foot hiking. Kolb Brothers, of course they would. They knew the canyon well, and I think they are the first, at least white people, to do a double crossing of the canyon. They also were very familiar with this area, the trail, the Bright Angel Trail, Indian Garden. They used the spring water to process photos and had operations down there in later years. But basically, they were no strangers to this area, and they would hike down there, they would take mules, whatever you like. And they apparently helped with a couple rescue missions to find lost or stranded people that made their way down the trail, which you can already see it winding down and down and down. Now, this is not a hike down the canyon today. If you want to see that, the one that I have that you might be interested in is the journey down to Indian Garden, which is, see that trail going onto that plateau? It's those trees down below. Maybe, imagine it's 1905, maybe 1906, and they've started their trade, and you know, they're up there on this house as people are coming down on their mule trains. Oftentimes their eyes looking back up there, probably at a photographer somewhere up there, I'm guessing, getting photos of them coming down the trail here from the studio, which once again, in the early days would not have resembled what you see here with all of the additions that were made to it. There probably would have been one single structure. And I am thinking it's the piece behind this front part. Now, just as I'm walking down here, I'm sure Amy's putting a lot of the pictures that I'm talking about of think of the women of the time, how they're dressed. And then I didn't see any riding side saddle. How lewd. I'm just kidding. But anyway, maybe that was acceptable here at the Grand Canyon. But yeah, somewhere right up there, they had to have been sitting. And I'm gonna guess the most logical place where a lot of those pictures were taken from was from up there, facing like this part of the trail as they were just starting to do their descent. That might be one of my favorite parts of the story, just to show you their resilience. They're photographers in a place where you needed water to develop the film. And there is no water right up here, so they would usually get their water, I think a couple miles away there was a cattle tank. You've seen them on our episodes, just a muddy hole of water that cattle would drink out of. So they would take muddy water to use in the washing of the photos. I don't know anything about like classic photography, but apparently you had to wash, and then there was like a final washing, and they would use the water they hauled from down there. But it would not have been easy. And then prior to the studio being even built, you need a dark room, right? You need a place to develop your film. So they were very creative, and they had a solution for that too. They didn't let anything get in their way. Somewhere around the building, I haven't figured out exactly where, is a prospector's hole. Basically, it would look like this, probably the start of a mine shaft, like a portal. Probably goes in a few feet, and then it stops. We've seen many of those on our journeys, but they were using the prospector's hole to develop their film. They put a curtain up in front of it, and that was really the only dark place they could have before they built the actual studio. One thing I want to point out also is, yeah, in 1904, they established the studio, and then the younger brother, Emery, operated this until 1976. And upon his death, the property had to come to the National Park Service. That was the deal, as when he died, it went to the National Park Service. And that was another one of those stories I heard, that when Emery was talking to the National Park Service, they were going to tear this down. They didn't want to keep it around, but the National Register of Historic Places saved the day once again. So after 1976, I believe they boarded it up for a while. It wasn't really open for a bit, and then the National Park Service converted it into a bookstore and museum and studio, which is awesome. So, but you think about things like that, there's a very fine line about what remains and what doesn't. And at one time, I'm just trying to point out that many thought this was an eyesore, and they didn't want it here. And they weren't a fan of the small man succeeding, and the big money tried to do things like put that lookout studio in between here and the El Tovar to deter business. And by the way, I haven't even gotten to the best part of the story yet, I think, for these people, these two brothers. The best part to me is their journey down the Colorado River in wooden boats. I think just the two brothers for part of it. And then I think they picked up some companions along the way, but they were the first to film it with cameras of the time, video, or not video, but I guess movie film cameras of the time, in very treacherous conditions. Had a lot of challenges and problems along the way, but they got it done, and they made a movie, which became one of the main reasons why they wanted to expand this, to put a little movie theater in here to show the film they made. And what a film it is. I actually spent some time seeing a little bit of that, but we'll learn more about that, I assume, when we go inside. But to me, that's where they became heroes for me, is seeing some of that footage and understanding what they did and the time they did it in. You know, most people I don't think have the guts to do something like that, even today. All right, let's go on into the Kolb studio.
This one?
They actually have the boat here. I don't know if this is one of the boats that was, it's one of 19 boats comprising the Grand Canyon Historic Boat Collection. And the boat was stored in Emery's garage with a human skeleton inside of it. There's a popular rendition of the two brothers. You'll see that picture of them, Ellsworth on the right and Emery on the left. It's very ghostly. I looked up there for a second, and it took less than a second for my brain to register that those are not ghosts of the Kolb brothers, but they're overlooking where they would have done their presentations. I wonder if this is where they did it, and this is where they had the, you know, everybody sitting in here watching, and maybe the narrator, which I heard Emery did narrations, would stand up there while they watched the video. You can actually see footage of that. I don't know if that's the actual movie, but I have seen some of this stuff on YouTube. Somebody uploaded something that had a narration that I think is Emery, and Amy can put a link in the description below, but I warn you, some of the footage is really deteriorated and hard to watch. But then I saw some PBS work of their 1911-1912 journey down there, and the footage is excellent. So let's briefly summarize. Two brothers come out here, really don't know much about photography, opt to spend a fortune in their time on a payment plan to start their own photography operation here at the canyon. They started in a tent. They're processing their film using muddy water that cattle drink out of. They're processing their film in a prospector's tunnel, a little mine, and then they eventually get permission to build the first part of this structure, and then they expanded it over the years to really entertain guests with their adventures and exploits. So, and everything really just got started by them taking photos for tourists, like you would see at Disney World or Disneyland. People take your pictures and then they want you to give them $5 for it. Well, same idea. Time-tested thing that works still. And down here, there's all sorts of things. National Geographic did a piece after their river tour. They worked with National Geographic, I read, and there you go. August 1914 was probably when they published that. And you see all sorts of, you know, things here, just real connections to the past. They would also sell, I think this is an example of one of their photo albums where they took photos and then they hand colored the photos and they sold them here. And they sold them here in their gift shop, the very gift shop that the Lookout Studio was built to compete with. And here's one of their cameras, later camera, 1909, that they actually paid $111.65 in 1909 currency, so not cheap. Oh, here we go. This actually shows us exactly what I was wondering about, the 1904 entry. Here's another photo of, an early photo of those guys hanging out there. You can actually see Emery and Ellsworth and Blanche, the wife of Emery, I believe. They're hanging out on the edge. More examples of early camera equipment a turn of the century camera, lantern slide. Then you've got, I think, a video camera, 1903, which this says they used it in their 1921 to 1923 river expedition with a U.S. Geological Survey. And here it really is, the big trip, the thing that I am most impressed with these guys, and it shows you their route. They didn't start here in the Grand Canyon, they started way upstream, areas that we've actually been down, probably in a different time before a lot of the dams were built, but they started up at Green River City and took the Green River and various canyons. I think they went through Marble Canyon, down here into this thing, all the way down to Needles, California. And I know Amy's gonna be putting plenty of old pictures up there because these were photographers and videographers, so there's lots of evidence, but you can see from their trip, this 1911 trip, the big one, and them dealing with issues. I think they had boats that ended up with holes in them. There's one right there. I've seen the same picture. See that? One of the brothers crashed into a rock and then they'd have to patch it up and deal with it. You know anybody that would do that today? Because if this happened today, I bet you whoever would do that, most people would just give up and get mad and say, screw this. But I heard that the people that traveled with them on part of this never even heard a curse word come out of these guys' mouth the whole time. They just dealt with it and they got it done. They lost film along the way, and even though they were disappointed, you know, they didn't let that deter them, and they saw their vision through, and that's why they are among heroes to me. If I'm not mistaken, this is the actual motion picture camera, or one of them, that they used in 1911 on their big trip, as it's called. So imagine something like that. You're down in really intense river rapids and water, and this is what you're working with. So this is the interesting thing, is it took them 101 days, by the way, to do all of this. One thing I never read is that when they got down here in this area on the river, they actually lit a signal fire to signal to Emery's wife and kid that they were alive and well, and they could see the fire from up here as they were passing through. I think that was 90 days into the trip or something like that. And like I said, they ended up in Needles, California, so they traversed the whole thing. I confirmed with one of the docents that I think I had it right. That was where a lecturer would have stood. Emery being a lecturer, I don't know if the only lecturer, but I know he lectured here. They would have stood up there as they played what I would assume is a silent film, and would do a live narration and talk over it. And I think that might be what I found on YouTube. There you go, look at that. See that? And people would come here to pay to see this, because think back in that time, this would have been legendary stuff. Nobody would have seen motion pictures of what it's like down there. I also confirmed that there are a lot of artifacts that are not on display here that would be, I already forget the name of the library, it's at NAU, the Klein Library or something like that. So the docent suggested that I go check that out at NAU in Flagstaff to see more artifacts. And I also asked, are any of the original boats that they took down the river, like the Edith, where did it go? Where's my picture at? Here we go. I think that was that's Emery's daughter's name. Do those still exist today? And they do. There's a conservancy here at the Grand Canyon where those boats still exist today, but they're in a warehouse and it's not open to the public, although I think they do offer tours occasionally. So that might be something we'll have to look at in the future, because I really want to do like a proper documentary on these two people to really honor them in the future, and maybe do some more reading to get more tidbits out of it, because I love this stuff. I think about office life today. I think about how people, we complain, whine. It's so bad. Come on, like this. This is what I'm talking about. Think about this the next time you want to complain about how your office doesn't serve coffee in the morning or some silly thing like that. At one point, it's kind of a celebration to me of these people, and on the other half, I'm very jealous, and I'm saddened that I live in a world where I feel like the final mysteries here on our terrestrial planet, everything's been explored, everything's been mapped out, everything's been done. It feels that way anyway. And It was the guys like this that were the first to the table. You guys beat me to it. But I don't know if I don't know if I would do it or not. I think I could if I was in the right company with the right spirits. And those guys, we salute you. I'm just sitting here watching a silent film, and it is entertaining as anything else you would see today. And it's amazing. Like, you see, look at this. The guy's trying to cross the river just with rope. That's crazy. I wish there was an audio narration to go along with it. I want to know more about the human skeleton that they had in this boat, and how, you know, the sign was saying how Emery said it was like a jigsaw puzzle to put together. It doesn't say whose skeleton it was, or it was like an old native skeleton or something like that. The skeleton remains unidentified, but he may have acquired it as a representative of the Coconino County Coroner's Jury. That is very strange. I want to know more about that. If anybody knows about that or has an anecdote to tell, please do, because I never read that, and that's fantastic. All right, I'm gonna get a few photos before I go on my other camera, and I didn't think I would enjoy this nearly as much as I have. Just the study on these guys, seeing the footage, being here now in person, putting it all together, it's impactful for me. I don't know what it is with those two standing up there looking down like this, you know, just the way they're posed, and their eyes follow you around. It's weird. It's like they're looking right at me. And I don't think they're too impressed. But look, guys, this is modern equipment that I'm using to film today in 2024, and just about anybody can do it now. They have these things called GoPros, and think of how many people have gone river rafting and traced your footsteps now in the modern times, where unfortunately the services of gentlemen like this are no longer needed. It's a different world, fellas. It's a different world. You got out of here at just the right time. You know, it's weird. Like, I always say I'm not a very sentimental person. I don't really get emotional. Certainly not teary-eyed, but I got a little bit, you know, kind of building up in here. I don't know what it is. It's more of an inspirational feeling. And maybe even a sadness, a realization that things are no longer like this, and I wish they could be. All right, I actually came out here with one of the docents. He walked out here with me, and we were kind of studying the building together, trying to figure out the original section, and we're having a hard time. I'm wondering if I think it might be this piece here, because the original entrance was on the side, and that's the only door that I see right now. But might have to save that for another day, but it's actually 4 stories high, so we weren't even at the bottom of it, apparently, and they do give tours of the whole facility, so there's much more to see that we couldn't. I was also talking about modern concerns. The husband and wife that are kind of working here have a lot of time here, and they know a lot, and they were a wealth of information, but the gentleman told me there's currently a contract. If anybody knows any roofing companies that can also work with historic structures, there's a current bid to replace the roof or to update the roof for $1.4 million. So if anybody can do better than that, there might be an opportunity here, but I want my finder's fee. But that's a lot of money. But I suppose, like I was telling the guy, it's not like they can throw a modern roof on there, so I'm sure it's a much different story, but that seems exorbitant to me, $1.4 million to do that. I think there's only one bid though. Anyway, what is now my favorite historic structure here at the Grand Canyon South Rim by far, and my favorite story or set of stories. All right, so I think I told you enough here, and one of these days I'm going to do a proper documentary on this stuff in the future when I have time and can do more research and put together something a little bit better than this, a little bit less casual in the future. It's going to be high on my list of stories that I want to tell, Cactus Atlas style. But let's take one more look here off the rim before we go to our next and last stop on this historic tour of the South Rim, which happens to be where one of the Kolb brothers, Emery, made his final home. Alrighty folks, our last stop on this tour today is next to something called the Shrine of the Ages, which I think is a church here on the premises, but we're going to a cemetery. Or would it be called a graveyard because it's next to a church? I don't know. I don't know the proper terminology for this one, but we'll see. I know it's called the Grand Canyon Pioneer. I want to say cemetery. So keep in mind, you know, a lot of the folks buried here, this is where they lived. This was their home in the Grand Canyon Village. This is what a lot of these people, some of them, they didn't know anything else. This is hard just to remember. I'm going by very faint memories from years ago of who was buried where, the ones that I wanted to seek out. I want to say the Verkamps are back here. But it's cool to see the family who, the original Mr. Verkamp, selling those Indian curios for the Babbitts right up there at the rim in the tent. And this is his legacy. I assume his legacy. All around here and all of these graves. A lot of these people probably lived and died here. Like let's see, Mary O'Leary Verkamp was born in 1917. So one might safely, and died in 1957. One might safely assume that Mary O'Leary lived here her whole life and probably worked at the store or was somewhat involved in it. I don't know the whole history of that depth, but it's fascinating to me to see that. You know, I didn't bring my phone. I like to have my phone when I have connectivity so I can look up facts, because now I don't remember, but this is John George or John G. Verkamp. Was born in 1877 and died in 1944. I think this is the OG Verkamp, is it not? Isn't that the Mr. Verkamp who had the tent set up and stuff? I would believe so. I don't know if one of these is his wife. Born in 1889. She lived a lot longer, into her 90s it looks like. 1979. And I'm kind of just going with my spidey senses here. There is a Kolb brother somewhere right around here if I remember. I just know it. This is Ellsworth's grave, 1876 to 1960, the older of the two brothers. Maybe I have things wrong, or maybe they're both here. But check it out. Ellsworth Kolb, and he was the first to die. The younger one lived until his 90s, like I said, till 1976. I'm looking for Emery. I could have sworn he was buried here. Is he over on this side? All right, I went on to find the grave. You can see there's a person, Ellsworth's grave, and it says that Emery and his wife Blanche are across the path and several sites down. I don't know in what direction, but that would mean this side, somewhere over here, I'm guessing. I walked through here and didn't see it. So we're gonna kind of start this way and make our way up so we could find those two. And now we know where one brother is, and I found it actually. There it is, just like it looked like in the picture. Okay, so we'll let that person have their enjoyment of that for now, and then we'll kind of talk here. Look at that. Emery C. Kolb, and then Blanche M. Kolb. Emery was born in 1881, died in 1976 in his 90s, and then Blanche died in 1960, so at 55 years of age. But she was also a big part of this operation, and I think they had one daughter together, Edith. And I don't know if Edith still lives or what, but the headstone reads, a hard worker and doer of many things. Photographer, artist, explorer, and lecturer. So how could you not come to a place like this and pay your respects to a guy like that, and his wife too? I mean, she was very much a part of the adventure, and his brother, even their daughter. I would say all of them. You got to see what probably his very hands helped build, and all of that equipment, all of it. And this is the gentleman that carried it through his whole life. Once again, his brother Ellsworth kind of backed out at a certain point. I want to say like 1914, after the big river trip I know happened. He kind of was in and out throughout the rest of the years and didn't do as much, I think, as Emery did. But they were both together and both part of that 1911 excursion where they videoed I say videoed, but I guess a motion picture of their trip down the Colorado River. feel kind of sad for old Ellsworth. He's over here, he doesn't got any shade. He's by himself. Easier to find than his brother and his brother's wife. But he's kind of out here, I guess, a nice little spot. Probably gets more visitors and people talking to him. So Ellsworth, I know you weren't into it as long as your brother was, but you were part of that epic trip in your wooden boats, going down the river, dealing with adversity, dealing with busted equipment, busted boats, and you didn't complain, I heard. You didn't even cuss, somebody said. I find that hard to believe, but maybe not. And I really wonder, in this day and age, even give people GoPros and have them do what you did, and I'm curious how many would actually finish the job. Probably not many. So I hope you know that. I hope you guys died realizing that, and I'm sure you did. Well, alrighty then, 2 Kolb Brothers, 1 cemetery. That's awesome. We'll say goodbye one more time wherever. They think right over here, Emery. So if you want to figure it out for yourself, let me show you if you want to visit and find them very quickly. You're gonna walk through that gate. You're gonna turn left and then head down this trail. And then remember, Ellsworth is right on the edge of the trail, right there in the center of the screen. And then his brother is across the path. And then a couple rows down, should be this one. Let's see if I remember already, if I've already forgotten. It's a good test. It is, and you can also spot this because it's got like an outline in like pine branches or whatever those are. Brother Emery, wife Blanche, and then you can't really see Ellsworth's headstone. It's kind of obscured right now by a bush or something, but he's right there. So you guys are pretty close together here. Well, I figure we should end it here at the foot of a hero's grave. Emery, Kolb, and then we'll include Brother Ellsworth, and Blanche, you're in on this too. Thank you guys for I'm thanking them for what they did, but I'm also thanking you for watching this, and hopefully I taught you about them and you didn't even know about them, and now you do. And I did my part. So if you like this video, Emery says please subscribe. That's how we do things in 2024, Emery. I won't even get into that. You don't even want to know. But anyway, yes, please subscribe if you haven't. And tell your friends about the Cactus Atlas. And above all, come back next week for more adventures. See you then. So you see, Emery, there's this thing called YouTube today. So think of what you guys were doing with your camera equipment. Now look at me and know that having video everybody has video. We have these things called phones, smartphones that serve as cameras. This little thing compared to that wooden box you were toting around, which unfortunately means the barrier to entry for what we do has been lowered greatly. Anybody can do it. Maybe that's a good thing, but I would say a more civilized age that you represented is no more. And now you got people making videos about their favorite Starbucks drinks. Oh, I gotta tell you what Starbucks is. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about, Emery. We got a lot to catch up on.